Hi, Mr. Minnick here, helping my students with Tracing While Loops worksheet number 3. This worksheet is all about flag variables. On the previous worksheet, worksheet number 2, we had a sentinel value. I think we used -1 as a sentinel value to exit the loop. Well, in this first exercise, we are using -1 as a sentinel value also. Notice that the user is told to input a -1 when he or she wants this loop to stop working and exit the program. And therefore, a -1 is the last value that's going to be inputted by the user. But in addition to that use of a sentinel value, this code segment also makes use of a famous computer science technique called a flag variable. So -1 is the sentinel value, but this variable called exit loop, it's called a flag variable. And maybe in a real program here, if this were typed up with good style, you would put a comment over here in the right margin calling this a flag variable. Think about being, no, don't think about this, but just consider a person stranded out in the ocean on a boat where the engine broke or the main sail got torn or something, and now the boat can't propel itself and get back safely to the shore. What would that person do? Well, maybe he or she would have those flags that they hold up, and that signals distress, SOS. And a Coast Guard cutter would be coming by and see the person flagging a distress signal. If that happened, you would kind of say that the flags were being used to indicate that something's up. Well, that's what's happening here in this variable, in this code piece of code. The variable named exit loop is equal to false, but at some point during this while loop, it will be set right here, equal to true. At that moment, because of this control expression here in the parentheses, the variable exit loop, which is known as the flag variable, will suddenly become false and stop this loop from working. That is good style. It's good, safe boating to always have flags in your boat in case you have to signal distress. You might not have a cell phone reception out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, so the flags sort of do it for you. In the previous worksheet, I think we had something like while something not equal to -1. Well, that would work, while num not equal to -1, but this is just better style to say exit loop equals false. Let's trace it finally and see how it really works. Here goes. Trace this with me. Average is equal to 0. Put a 0 there. Count is equal to -1. Okay. Sum and num are both 0. And I didn't make a column for this variable exit loop. I probably should have. Exit loop. Please do this with me. Make a little column for exit loop and set it equal to the word false. Notice that it has a interesting data type. It's called a Boolean. Boolean variables are allowed to be equal to either true or false. You can't put the number 0 or 1 or -1 or something like that into a Boolean variable. It's just a data type that allows trues and falses. Now I ask Bailey back there, what is the control expression equal to right now in this problem? Is this overall true or false?
It is false.
Is exit loop equal to false, Bailey?
Yes, exit loop is equal to false.
So overall, is this considered to be true or false?
Oh, true.
True. Very good. He got it true.
I meant false code.
That's okay. So it's true. That means we do go through the loop, which really was our goal here, to go through the loop at least once. Okay, so far so good. Now let's do what's in the loop. Sum plus equals num. That takes a 0 and adds it into sum, which is currently 0. So put a 0 there. Next, count plus equals 1. That just adds 1 to count. When you add 1 to -1, you're up to 0. And now we do the num equals input box. Well, you're supposed to assume, like the last worksheet, that the first number that the user inputs is a 20. So a 20 gets plugged into num. Cross that out, make it a 20. And now we get to this if statement. If num equals -1. Well, that's false. Num is not currently equal to -1. So we don't do whatever's in that inner if statement there. And we hit end while, which Elvis knows sends us back up to the top of the while loop for another iteration. And we get back up to the top where we ask Bailey all over again, is exit loop equal to false? True or false, Bailey?
Exit loop false.
Is exit loop equal to false?
Yes.
Correct. True. Correct. A yes is really a true. Okay, good. We go through this madness again. Sum plus equals num. You take 20, Jeanette, which is currently num, it's 20, and we're adding it into sum, which is currently 0. So that 20 added in there means that sum is also 20. And we add 1 to count. Jacob knows that 0 plus 1 is 1. And now we ask the user to input another number into the input box that pops up right now on the guy's screen. Let's all agree that he inputs a 9. So a 9 plugs into num. Cross the 20 out, it's now 9. And we ask, let's ask Andrew. Andrew, on my screen right now, is num equal to -1?
Yeah.
Correct, false. Excuse me, so we don't do the exit loop equals true. And we hit Elvis's end while, which loops us back up to the top. Bailey tells us that this is true again, so we go through the loop again. Jeanette tells us that we take num and we add it into sum, so that 9 gets added in here for a grand total of 29. We add 1 for count. Count is up to 2 now. We ask somebody if num is equal to -1, and they would say false. I think it's Andrew's job to say false there. And so Elvis's iteration continues back up to the top. Bailey tells us that this is still true. And Jeanette tells us to add 9 to 29. Oh, we forgot to put the 15 in num. Sorry about that. That should be a 15 now. So Jeanette tells us to add 15 to 29. That is 44, by the way. We then hit the line of code count plus equals 1. So that's up to 3. There's one more input box that pops up. And this time the guy inputs a -1, which plugs into num. The guy followed our directions. He's typing in -1. It's the sentinel value. The red coats are coming. The red coats are coming. -1, -1. So we put a little -1 over here under num. And finally, Andrew tells us that this if statement is true, because -1 is equal to -1. So Dan S evaluates the line of code exit loop equals true. So please cross out this false and put the word true there, because that is what just happened. And now we hit Elvis's end while, which tells us to loop back up to the tippy top. And finally, Bailey, I ask you, is exit loop equal to false?
Yeah.
Here's the exit loop.
Wait.
Is exit loop currently equal to false? Is, in other words, is true equal to false?
No.
Correct. Overall, you'd have to say false to that.
You know, if you made the correct enter exit loop equals true, this would have made this a lot less confusing.
What? You think that I'm not writing readable code? What is your suggestion? Let me think about this.
Well, no, I mean just wording wise, because I mean.
Okay, well, let's first take care of what just happened. You just said false to all this, and you were correct, so this doesn't execute, and we run this last line of code now that's below the whole loop. What is sum divided by count at this time? 44 divided by 3. 44 divided by 3. 3 goes into 14 4 times. 4 times 3 is 12. Left over 2. It's 14.666666 repeating, which, because average is an integer, that rounds up to 15, and that's the same answer that we had on the previous worksheet. Circle these as your final answers, and we will consider Bailey's idea here. Bailey, do you think there was a better way to have worded exit loop equals false? I agree, there might be.
It just makes it confusing because if it's false, that means the statement is true.
Oh, yeah.
The statement
Having a false here makes this whole thing true. Well, I can't help you out with that one because that's just the way it is. A lot of times programmers, they have that kind of reverse logic going on and you have to trace the code. But I will throw this out to you as an idea. You could have retyped this as while not exit loop, with parentheses around exit loop, the variable name. That is another way that that could have been rewritten. And I wouldn't be able to take points off because actually some people would say this is more readable. Having all of this in there. If exit loop is true, that means the not of a true is false overall. And some people like that way of doing it. Other people, they might have done this. While exit loop not equal to true. That's also a legal way to have the same thing happen. And I think there are even other variations. So I just happened to use the variation that Bailey just didn't care for, but quite frankly, Bailey might be hard to satisfy there because having a lot of trues and falses knotted is never really easy. So sometimes it's just tricky no matter how you do it. Okay, good luck on numbers 2 and 3 for homework. I'm looking ahead. Yes, there's another flag variable in problem number 2. The numbers that are inputted into the input box are the same. I don't know what the difference is, if there is any. I'll trace that one though and show good scratch work. Question number 3. Oh, I see what we did. I just gave you a heads up. We just put a different control expression in here in these two while loops. So a lot of it's exactly the same. Good luck with those two exercises. And then numbers 14 and 15 you can probably answer by reading my lecture notes or just paying attention to the worksheet as you do it.